Candy and I are absolutely delighted to be here with you today. What a spectacular church you have here. I mean, this sprang up from a bunch of fields 25 years ago and really says something tremendous. And I'm so impressed with your pastor, who many of you know the history. I mean, it's a movie as far as I'm concerned. It should be a movie. Because can you imagine the encouragement it would be for so many people in our society today to recognize that you can come from virtually anywhere. And if you work hard and you put your faith in God, you can go virtually any place. And you know, that's why America is still the land of dreams. You know, for me, it was a dream of becoming a doctor. It was the only thing I ever wanted to do. I skipped right by policemen and firemen, went straight to doctor, you know. And I loved anything that had to do with medicine. I even liked going to the doctor's office. I mean, I would gladly sacrifice a shot just so I could smell those alcohol swabs, you know. It was great, you know. But you probably would not have figured that I was going to be successful in that endeavor. Things weren't all that great early on. My parents got divorced when I was 8 years old. They were both from Tennessee, by the way, from Chattanooga, you know. You know, my mother, they were both from very large families, but, you know, my mother was just sort of shuffled from home to home, place to place, never really had a place to call her own. She got married at age 13, trying to escape desperate poverty. And they moved to Detroit, where my father was a factory worker. And then she discovered, you know, that he was a bigamist, had another family. You know, if he had been smart, he would have listened to her. Because even though she only had a third-grade education, she was very wise. And she saved every penny he made as a factory worker and invested in land. And at one point, they had a great deal of land. And then he kind of messed it all up, you know, with drugs and alcohol and gambling and women. And women are okay, but you only need one. And, you know, that probably would have been a very bad influence on me. Even though, you know, as a child, I would pray all the time, Lord, please help them to get back together. But I didn't really know what the circumstances were that were underlying all of that. But at any rate, you know, it went on. I was a terrible student. We were very poor, never had money for anything, even though my mother tried to make things good for us. She was so thrifty. She would go to the Goodwill, and she'd buy a pair of trousers with a big hole in the knee, back before that was fashionable. And then she would get patches and put it on there, and everybody would be saying, where did you get those from? And we would go out in the country on a Sunday morning. She'd knock on farmers' doors, say, can we pick 4 bushels of your beans or corn or apples or grapes? 3 for you and 1 for us. And they always liked that deal. And then she would bring the stuff home and she would can it. She would drive a car until it wouldn't make a sound. And then she would gather up all of her dimes and nickels and quarters and go buy a new car. And people would say, how does that woman afford a new car? What is she doing? What is she selling? She's doing something wrong. But she was just wise and thrifty. And I do believe that if my mother were Secretary of Treasury, we would not be in a deficit situation. I mean, some people think that it requires many years of elected experience to be able to solve any problems in our country. And they say, well, you can't do anything because you don't have any elected experience. Well, you know what? If you add up all the elected experience of Congress, it comes out to 8,700 years. And where has that gotten us? You know? Because, you know, Certainly, certainly what we have to think about is the fact that our country was designed for citizen statesmen, not necessarily for career politicians. And we have to keep that in mind. Now, I know many politicians, and some of them are very good people, very decent people with a good heart, but a lot of them are not also. And what I'm hoping will happen if, God smiles on this candidacy and it's successful, is that a lot of Americans from all walks of life who are very smart and very capable will begin to expand the ring of candidates that we use for the selection of our leaders in our country. We need to have a broad swath of people with amazing skills and talents. And it's not to say that the people who are there now don't have skills and talents, but we can broaden that pool very, very significantly, because what I've discovered in my decades on corporate boards, in establishing the Carson Scholars Fund with my wife, which is active in all 50 states and has won major national awards, in my work as a pediatric neurosurgeon in academia, I've discovered that there are just amazing people in this country with the kinds of talent that will just blow you away. And if we learn how to work together and use that talent and focus it on the actual problems that we have, I have no doubt that we can achieve the kind of greatness that no one has ever seen before. That's one of the things that's special about the United States of America, and something that we need not be ashamed of. It's something that God has blessed us with. And I think He blesses us and has blessed us in the past because we were not ashamed of Him. We were not afraid to say, "In God we trust." We were not afraid to put it in our documents. But now we seem to be in a hurry to dismiss God and to dismiss everything about Him. And, I am fascinated by the progressives, they call themselves. That's not a very good title for them, actually. But, they say, "Carson, how can you be a surgeon, a neurosurgeon, and believe that God created the earth and not believe in evolution, which is the basis of all knowledge and all science?" Well, it's kind of funny, but I do believe that God created us, and I did just fine. So I don't know where they get that stuff from. It's not true. And in fact, the more you know about God and the deeper your relationship with God, I think the more intricate becomes your knowledge of the way that things work, including the human body, including the way that our environment works. All of these things become clear because the wisdom to understand comes from God. And people who are not so connected, they're unable to understand the things of God. It seems to them, as the Bible says, as foolishness. And they don't recognize that if they want to see foolishness, all they need to do is look in the mirror. That's where it really is, And they try to intimidate you, with the political correctness and with putting so much pressure on you. And it's a problem in our country. People yield to that, and they're afraid that someone's going to call them a name. The intimidation works very well. I remember as a youngster, when I learned my lessons about intimidation, I was intimidated by dogs, very frightened by dogs. I would be late to school all the time because of dogs. I'd be almost there, and then there would be a dog, and I had to go all the way back around the block. And then I'd be almost there, and then there's another dog. And the teachers were tired of my dog excuses. And then there was an old man who helped me. He said, "Benny, dogs will only bother you if they think you're afraid of them." if you show no fear, they will not bother you. I said, are you sure about that? And, well, there was a dog on our block. Nobody liked to go down in that area. His name was Rusty. He was really a vicious dog. I said, I'm going to try this out on Rusty. So I went walking down there. Rusty couldn't believe his eyes, and he came running after me, barking and snarling, and I said, this was a mistake. But he ran right up to my leg, sniffed it, turned around, went back to the porch. The next day, he just barked at me from the porch. The next day, he just looked at me. The next day, he didn't even bother to look at me because it wasn't worth his while, because I wasn't afraid of him. And I got to tell you, that's how we've got to treat the secular progressives also. Don't be afraid of them. Well, unfortunately for me, I got over the intimidation, but I was still a terrible student. And it was really my mother who helped me get through that, and my brother also. She was terrified that we would end up like she did, with inability to get a good job because she didn't have a good education. And yet we were doing poorly in school. So she prayed, and she asked God to give her the wisdom to know what to do to get her sons to understand the importance of intellectual development. And that's the wonderful thing about God. You don't have to have a PhD to talk to him. You just have to have faith. And she had faith that he would answer her prayer. And he did. He gave her the wisdom. At least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was that wise. I mean, turning off the TV, what kind of wisdom is that? And making us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Library and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And she would put check marks, highlights, and underlines, and we would think she was reading them, but she wasn't. But, and I was outraged. I mean, everybody else was having fun, and there I was stuck in the house reading books. It was horrible as far as I was concerned. And her friends would criticize her, and they would say, you can't make boys stay in the house reading books. They'll grow up and they'll hate you. And I would overhear them, and I would say, Mother, they're right, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Still had to do it. But a funny thing happened as I started reading those books. I'm looking at words all the time. So I learned how to spell. And I'm looking at how those words are put together, so I learn grammar and syntax. And then I have to take those sentences and make them into concepts, so you learn how to use your imagination. All of those things lead to much greater academic achievement. And in the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all the students who used to laugh and call me dummy. They were now coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but it sure felt good to say that to those turkeys. But it was just a matter of using that brain that God has given you. Because we are made in the image of God. And God is no dummy. And that's something that we must always keep in mind. And, you would have thought that life was going to be terrific for me, but it wasn't, because I still had a horrible temper. And I would go after people with rocks and bricks and baseball bats and hammers. And when I was 14, I almost stabbed someone with a knife. They had on a large metal belt buckle under their clothing, and the knife blade struck with such force it broke. And I was terrified, recognizing that I was trying to kill somebody over nothing because I was out of control. And I locked myself in the bathroom, and I just said, Lord, you got to help me. If he hadn't had that belt buckle on, he would have been killed or seriously injured. I would have been on my way to jail or reform school. And I just prayed that somehow God would deliver me. And there was a Bible, and I picked it up and opened it to the book of Proverbs. And there were all these verses in there about fools. Seemed like they were all written about me. But there were also verses about anger, like Proverbs 19:19. There's no point getting an angry man out of trouble because he's just going to get back into it. And encouraging verses like Proverbs 16:32, mightier is the man who controls his temper than the man who can conquer a city. Verse after verse, chapter after chapter, they seemed like they were all written about me. And I stayed in there for 3 hours thinking, praying, reading. And I came to an understanding during those 3 hours that to lash out at somebody, to punch somebody in the face was not a sign of strength. It was a sign of weakness. It meant that you could be easily manipulated by someone else. You could be easily controlled by someone else. And if you were angry all the time, it also meant that you were selfish. It's always about me, my, and I. Somebody did this to me. They took my thing. I want this. And if you learn how to step out of the center of the equation and let it be about someone else, it's very difficult for people to make you angry. And when I came out of that bathroom after 3 hours, the anger was gone. I've never had another angry outburst since that day. And some people say, you just learn how to hide it. But I have to tell you a secret. When God fixes the problem, he doesn't do a paint job. He fixes it from the inside. And God always prepares you for what he wants you to do. You know, things went well for me, and I went to Yale, and then I went to University of Michigan for medical school, and Johns Hopkins for residency. And while I was chief resident at Hopkins, we had the grand opening of the Neuroscience Center. And since Hopkins is sort of like the birthplace for modern neurosurgery, all the bigwigs from around the world were there, including one of the bigwigs from Australia. And he took a liking to me and said, you need to come to Australia to be our senior registrar at our major teaching hospital in Western Australia. And I said, Australia, are you kidding me? I didn't say that out loud, but that's how I was thinking. I mean, Australia, you drill a hole from Baltimore, you come out in Australia. I didn't want to go there. Plus, I had heard that they had a whites-only policy, so I wasn't all that interested. But it seemed like every time we turned around, there was somebody saying, good eye, mate. And every time we turned the TV on, there was a special about Australia. So I said, Candy, I think the Lord wants us to go to Australia. And she started doing some research. She discovered that they did have a whites-only policy, but they had abolished it in 1968. And this was 1983. So we sold all of our earthly belongings, and off we went to Australia. And our friends were saying, you'll be back in 3 weeks. But little did they know, we didn't have any more money, so we couldn't come back. But the biggest problem we had in Australia is keeping up with all the dinner invitations. Everybody loves Americans over there. And the second biggest problem, every time I sat down and started writing in a chart, invariably someone would come up to me and say, do you mind if I feel your hair? And I would say, you can feel it, but it's going to cost you $10. But I would always get back at the Aussies. I would say, look, I can't remember any of your names because you all look alike. But it turned out to be a fabulous experience because there were only 4 neurosurgical consultants in all of Western Australia. And once they discovered that I knew how to operate, they made a beeline for the private hospitals. And I was sort of in charge of the main teaching hospital doing 3 or 4 major craniotomies every day. So I got an enormous amount of experience. If I had stayed on at Hopkins on faculty, I would have been the low man on the totem pole, just get what nobody else wants to do. So by the time I came back a year later, the position opened up for director of pediatric neurosurgery, and instead of them going out and looking for somebody with a lot of gray hair and a big name, they said, well, Carson's very young, but he knows how to do everything. So There I was at age 33, director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, and people would come from great distances to see Dr. Ben Carson, chief of pediatric neurosurgery, and I would walk in the room and they would say, "When is Dr. Carson coming?" And I would say, "I'm Dr. Carson," and some people would just about have a seizure, which is how I got interested in seizure surgery. No, that's not how I got interested. But the fact of the matter is, you begin to talk to them and you tell them what's going on, and all of a sudden, all the anxiety just melts away. And it's fabulous. But I must admit that I thought I was pretty hot stuff. And it was this little boy from Georgia that taught me better. He was a prodigy. At age 2, he was already saying Bible verses. But at age 4, all of a sudden, he couldn't walk anymore. He started stumbling. His eyes were looking in different directions. He couldn't handle his secretions. He was diagnosed with a malignant brainstem tumor. He saw multiple specialists. Nobody had any different opinion. They ended up at Hopkins. And when he rolled on the wards, I looked at him, barely moving, barely breathing, eyes looking in different directions. I said, "What am I supposed to do here?" I looked at the scans and I saw this ugly, ugly tumor of the brainstem. And the parents said, "Doctor, we were led here by the Lord because we would find a Christian neurosurgeon who could help our son." And I said, "But this is a malignant brainstem tumor. There's nothing that I or anybody can do about this." And they said, "But doctor, the Lord is going to heal our son, and he's going to use you to do it." I said, "Look, MRIs are brand new." They were brand new at that time. I said, "Let's do an MRI. Maybe it'll show something we don't see on a CAT scan." Did an MRI. I showed it to all the neuroradiologists. They all said the same thing: malignant brainstem tumor, nothing to be done. They said, "But doctor, the Lord is going to heal our son. He's going to use you to do it." I said, "Look, every once in a while, maybe once in 1,000 or more, the scans are wrong and we see this reaction to fungus or something." I said, "So I'll biopsy it." I went in. There was this ugly grayish-red mass. I took a biopsy. It came back high-grade astrocytoma, a malignant tumor. I took out as much as I dared, closed them up, went out and talked to the parents. I said, only God knows why people are here and how long they should be here. Maybe your son has already served his purpose and will understand it better by and by. All the things we always tell people. And they said, "Doctor, thank you. The Lord is going to heal our son." As I walked away, fully expecting that he was going to deteriorate and die, I must say I admired the faith. I'd never seen people with faith like that before. But instead of getting worse, he actually got better. Over the next couple of days, his eyes started looking the same direction. He started handling secretions. I said, "Wait a minute, what's going on?" I said, "Let's do another MRI." There was still a big ugly mass, but I could see a little ribbon of tissue pushed way off into one of the corners. I said, "Is it possible that maybe this is outside of the brainstem and is just crushing the brainstem?" And I said, "Maybe we should go back in." And they said, "By all means." And when I went back in there, the whole nature of the tumor had changed, and layer by layer under the microscope as I peeled it away, I got to the last layer, and there was a glistening white brainstem, fully intact, smashed and displaced, but intact. Long story short, that boy walked out of the hospital and is a minister today. But one of the oncologists involved in that case said, "Ben, I've always been an atheist, but I'm a believer now." But it wasn't for him, it was for me. Because you see, I thought I was doing all this stuff. I thought I was this great person, who was so smart, who had come out of Detroit, had gone to Yale and Michigan and Hopkins and achieved this status at such a young age. But I realized at that point that it wasn't me. that it was God. And I made an agreement with him right there. I said, Lord, you be the neurosurgeon and I'll be the hands. And that's when all these amazing things began to happen. That's when it happened. And then I watched over the years as the Lord did things. And sometimes I wondered why he did things. I wondered why he put me on the corporate board of Kellogg's and Costco and made me the lead director of a biotech company. And we started a scholarship program, Candy and I, and it became very, very successful and won major national awards that only one philanthropic organization in the country per year wins. And it got me involved with so many different people. And I said, why? What is the purpose of all this? And it wasn't until this whole presidential thing came up that I began to realize that God always prepares you for what he wants you to do. And he was in the process of giving me all of this economic knowledge, visiting 57 countries, learning so much about what else is going on in the world, not so that I could be a better neurosurgeon, but he had something else in mind. And I must say, it wasn't something that I particularly wanted to do or planned on doing. But I finally just said to him, because there were so many things pushing me in that direction, I said, Lord, if you want me to do this, then you have to open the doors. And if you open the doors, I will walk through them. And if you close the doors, I will gladly sit down. And he has just flung the doors open, given me an amazing organization, brought in hundreds of thousands. We're at 800,000 donations now from average people. And it's really not about me, and I recognize that. It is about we, the people. And this nation is for we, the people. We're supposed to be the ones who guide the nation and provide a direction for it. The government is there only to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for us. And it's time that we begin to think about exerting ourselves once again, but it's going to require courage and faith. And we have to stop relinquishing the things that we believe in, the godly principles of loving your fellow man, of caring about your neighbor, of developing your God-given talents to the utmost so that you become valuable to the people around you, of having values and principles that guide our lives. And we must reject those people who say, there is no right, there is no wrong, everything is relative, so that they can do whatever they want to do, and so that they can negate the influence of God. We must reject the people who want to change the definitions of everything, because if they change the definitions, then they can do what they want to do. And it can only happen if we refuse to stand up for the Judeo-Christian values and principles that establish this as a great nation. So we are the ones who will make that decision. And I think it was Thomas Jefferson who perhaps put it the best. He said, the people of America would become lackadaisical. They would stop paying careful attention to what was going on. And as a result of that, the government would grow, and it would infiltrate, and it would begin to dominate the people. But just before we turned into something else, Jefferson said the people of America would awaken. They would realize what was going on, and they would rise up and retake control of the government. And I think right now is the time to do that. Thank you very much.
you, Doctor. You're a blessing. Amen. Everybody hold still for just a second. Dr. Carson, Dr. Carson. Hold on just a second. Could y'all sit down for just a second? I have a little note here. Just a surprise. I just want you to see this. Where is Stacy Nicole Roberts? Stacy, would you stand up wherever you are? Ushers, help me. Help me. Anybody see Stacy? Well, I was told she was here. She was here yesterday. You performed brain surgery on her when she was 13 in 2001. And she's a beautiful young lady today. Where's she at? She's in line. Herb, take her to the front of the line and let her see the doctor that saved her life. God bless you. Amen. All right. They're going to put the slide up there. When you get your book and you're going to get a picture taken with Dr. Carson, you're going to need to write this email address down, drcarsontour.com. drcarsontour.com. And this afternoon, 24 hours, you have to go online, download it, and get your pictures. drcarsontour.com. Books are out there, all in the lobby. If you're not a part of our church, I want to see you back this coming week, and I want you to stand all over Cornerstone. And I want you to say this with me. You know, Dr. Carson talked a little bit about my testimony, and many of you know that God saved me when I was undone. And every day of my life, I count myself blessed. The fact that I have friends and family in this place today at this point is actually overwhelming. I am humbled by what God has done in this church and the people that God has let me do life with. And I want you to feel the same way. And life and death are in the power of your tongue. So I want you to confess it this morning. And I want you to say it like you mean it. I'm too blessed to be depressed. I'm too anointed to be disappointed. I'm sitting on top of the world with my feet hanging off. You're dismissed, church. God bless you. Dana, get Galen. Get Scotty and the Blacks.